I can't believe what I just played. I finished this game mere moments before opening this document to write, and I cannot believe that in the year of our Lord 2024, I played not just a good Sonic game, but a near perfect Sonic game. I'm in awe. This video was originally planned to be a Patreon exclusive as a companion to my serious critique of Shadow the Hedgehog, but I had such a good time with this game that I decided I couldn't leave this video behind a paywall, it wouldn't be fair. I'll find something else to give Patreon as an exclusive, I promise. I'm sorry, but this one just needs to see the light of day. I went into this expecting it to be good. I mean, I'd heard so many good things from tons of people whose opinions on Sonic I value, so I knew this game would be good. But this good? Absolutely not. I had no idea what I was in for. This game, for the first time since, in my opinion, 2006, discounting comics, which I won't read because, hey, how about make your games good instead of your quality writing being shafted into another medium? This happens to all of my favorite things. This game, for the first time since 2006, gets Shadow. It's remarkable how much it respects and cares for this character, for his legacy, and for the themes that underpin his entire existence. There's more to tackle there, but we'll get into it. The other angle is the gameplay, and my fucking god, 3D Sonic has never felt this good. I'd honestly argue even with the Frontiers engine holding it back, it still surpasses Generations and Unleashed, which might be heresy to say, but I believe it, and here's why. The core reason is the level design. There's something so different yet familiar about how levels are designed in Shadow, and I think it's by nature of how it splits 3D and 2D into different stages. During a 3D level, you are never forced into a 2D perspective, which became a huge issue with a lot of the later modern Sonic levels. It lent into a particular style of play that felt far more on rails than it used to be when it was just 3D or just 2D. In splitting these perspectives into separate stages, it means each perspective can reach greater heights. 3D perspective stages feels like an evolution of a formula which was thrown out in 2008. I love the boost formula, but it never felt like an evolution of the adventure slash heroes slash I guess 06 formula. It felt like something else entirely. Shadow brings them together in a kind of harmony that feels infinitely satisfying. This game is probably what Sonic 06 wanted to be. These levels balance speed and precision in a way I always felt the modern boost formula never truly achieved, no matter how satisfying it could feel. And coming right out of Sonic Generations, I think that made it doubly clear. The levels allow for speed, they allow for that fantasy, but they don't put you on rails or disregard platforming to do so. They have multiple paths, they often require timing and precision from controls that are as precise and as tight as they need to be. Never did I feel I would miss a jump unless I messed up. Never did I think I would hit an enemy unless I fucked it. The game was reliable, the game was responsive, and that's deeply important. After playing Sonic Generations just before, often Sonic will feel weighted when you're trying to do smaller and more slow platforming sections. But in Shadow, you don't. You feel light without feeling floaty. Shadow feels exactly as you'd expect him to every single time you make a jump, and so every single time you can time with absolute accuracy, and it never stops feeling amazing. In Sonic Generations, pulling off flawless levels could feel like a matter of trial and error. You replay the levels, you learn when to jump, when to boost, you remember them so that you can nail them. And don't get me wrong, that's fun. I love Generations. But Shadow? You can rely on your reactions 100% of the time without any knowledge of what's coming up. Relying on your skill and not memory is key, and it changes the game for me. One of the things I criticized the original Sonic game for in my video on that was that for some of the levels, speed and mastery is often something that takes time to learn, and before that, the levels can be miserable. But in Green Hill, Spring Park, and Starlight, fun is innate, but still allows room for depth the more you master a stage, which is key to the fun and key to what made Sonic 2 such a success. Shadow does this too. A first run can feel immensely satisfying as you use pure reaction time to get that S rank. But with more plays, you discover more routes and paths and can optimize your run for nothing more than personal satisfaction, and that's a powerful thing. Well, there's leaderboards, but I personally do it for a love of the game. The levels just go and don't let up. I feel like I've come to expect Sonic levels will end in a matter of 2 minutes maximum, but some of these went a lot longer, and every time I felt the set pieces building and the design developing before my eyes, they'd get louder and more complex with every second that ticked on by, giving you more obstacles, but also more options and more rewards for tackling them. both material and in pure presentation as well. And because these levels don't need to force you into 2D, it allows them to branch out more, not just up and down, but to the sides. It allows them once again to feel as sprawling as a level from Sonic 06 was trying to be. You feel a sense of adventure as you progress, and having that back isn't something I realized was even missing until this game. It's such a simple adjustment in basic design philosophy, but it adds a dimension 3D Sonic had been missing for a very long time, and that's exploration of a level. No longer is it just taking the high road or the low road, now it's seeing what's around a space, taking paths you didn't know were there. Stages are not just complex corridors, they are sprawling spaces you are moving through. 2D levels do the same. It allows for the aspects of those levels that shine to be taken to new heights. These are able to be evolutions of the classic formula, with some of the best parts of colors and none of the worst. And speed is never dropped because of this perspective. Often the game will warn you of dangers, either by altering the camera to look slightly ahead or by subtle environmental objects letting you know. I felt so often I was playing something right out of those original Mega Drive games, but supercharged, and it continued the trend of skill mattering more than memory. I always felt in control, and like my ability was deciding my outcome despite never having played these levels before in my life. Both types of levels are given greater dimension by the Black Doom powers added to this game, which obviously have great thematic bearing too, but in a totally gameplay sense, these allow for new and creative ways to interact with levels, and every time I got a new one, I felt genuinely excited to try it out. Often in games like this, new abilities that greatly change how you play can feel like a burden, something that overcomplicates a good thing. But in Shadow, that's not the case. They seamlessly weave into your already existing repertoire. From the Doom Surf to Cross Water to Blast, which allows for some really creative play depending on where you fire the enemy off to, allowing you to clear areas in record time, or the Doom Wings, which allow you to choose when and where to activate the wings and allow you to get the advantage in areas that might be tricky otherwise. And the way these are unlocked via specific locations in the hub between major story moments gives them greater weight than them being in some random skill tree in the pause menu. Just as a random example, not pointing fingers. But it's not just those additions. Shadow also has his Chaos Control and Chaos Spear, which have become staples of his character. These are huge for player agency within stages and keeping you engaged with the level that you're playing, from control being used at key moments you feel are best to slow things down, to stop enemies from damaging you, to keep platforms in place to reach higher areas or collectibles, or just to slow the clock for that S rank. And Chaos Spear is something you need to use to hit certain items within levels and challenges, for extra rings or to open doors and activate platforms, or to stun enemies that would otherwise damage you from a direct homing attack. With all of these elements considered, it feels like they were trying as hard as possible when designing this game to not fall into the trap of boost to win. You have to be thinking, you have to be paying close attention, and you have to be active in a way you never have before in a 3D Sonic game, especially using the boost formula. But this doesn't make levels a chore or too hard. They weave themselves so naturally into the design of levels, and I have never felt as satisfied as moving at breakneck speed only to see a locked door that I can quickly open with a Chaos Spear without slowing down, or transitioning between Doom abilities on the fly without losing any momentum. On my first run of levels too. I felt so in control of Shadow, and it's glorious, and I will be going for every single S rank when I get the chance because I cannot get enough of this and that iPhone alarm sound that it makes when tallying up your score. On a visual and presentation level, generally these levels look fantastic. I will always prefer the way Unleashed and Generations looked. They had this glossy finish that I really vibe with. I think since Forces, these games have sort of looked very matte and flat, although Shadow does look really nice in the cutscenes. I think that's tremendous. On the topic of visuals, actually, I also don't love how Shadow's boost animation looks. I think his hover, skate, shoe things look so cool, but you barely ever see that animation because you're usually boosting. I would have loved if Boost had just had him skate faster or something, so that's a minor shame. I think the choice of stages was half really good and half really bizarre, well, more like a quarter bizarre. Space Colony Arc, Rail Canyon, Kingdom Valley, and Radical Highway are very cool picks, but Sunset Heights? Chaos Island? I don't understand these. If you can use 2 levels from Sonic Adventure 2, why not grab another from Heroes or 06? Better yet, why not use some from Shadow the Hedgehog? Cryptic Castle would have been really cool, or maybe use Final Haunt for the ending level. Sunset Heights doesn't feel like an iconic Shadow level. Neither does Chaos Island. I mean, Shadow wasn't even in Frontiers, and also both Frontiers and Forces are set after Generations. I guess you could say it's pulling levels from the future, but they're both boring visually and don't feel really emotionally charged like the rest of the stages do, having a meaningful connection to Shadow's past. My issues are less lore issues and more just that they don't carry great emotional weight, but from a design perspective, they're wonderful to play all the same. A major part of this game is its open world. Sorry, I got that wrong in my Shadow the Hedgehog video when I kept calling Frontiers an open world game. It's an open zone game. Or so I've been told. Shadow Generations Open Zone is an interesting one, because I think it takes what worked from Frontiers and applies it to a context that allows it to flourish, while removing a lot of aspects that felt forced or boring or tedious. I'm looking at you, Coco Minigames. Moving around this hub area is a joy. As you complete more levels, more areas open up, and it gets progressively more complex and interconnected as you scour for collectibles to store in your collectibles room, where you have Shadow's iconic fucking bike. Thank the gods that this is here. You can't ride it, but I'm just happy to see this thing, man. It's so beautiful. This gives a nice meaning to the things that you collect. You collect these gears that open chests around the hub, all of which have little pieces of Shadow memorabilia in them, and that's cute. It's similar to what Sonic Generations did with the red rings, but here you have to actually go and open the chest that you want, and it gives each thing a little more fanfare, which feels more rewarding. It's a small change, but a necessary one, I feel, also giving more meaning to the hub area. Around the hub, you can also meet characters like Omega and Rouge and Big the Cat, but sadly he can't help you skip the whole game with fishing this time, which results in me giving this game a big fat 0 out of 10, sorry Sonic team. The main function of the hub is the same as Sonic Generations. You have to collect keys to open the boss gates, and to do so you have to complete challenges, which I think are superior to Sonic Generations, both in their design and in their variety. Sonic Generations felt like it had the same 4 to 6 mission types on a rotation. Shadow feels like it has less overall challenges, thank god, but makes them more varied and engaging as a result, which made the search for the boss keys far more interesting and actually a fun part of the game rather than a means to an end. Also, this level was awesome. It's basically Lost Impact, but good. The bosses though? Oh boy, the bosses. They're fucking magnificent. BioLizard is such a brilliant evolution of its classic battle from Sonic Adventure 2, although its gills are horrible, I hate those. It changes just enough to make it feel fresh whilst being such a faithful recreation of how it functioned in Sonic Adventure 2. It's so incredibly dynamic, which I think is what's key to all of these boss fights working as well as they do. You're not static as you dodge attacks and deal damage during openings, you're always moving, always thinking, always engaged, just like the main levels themselves. Metal Overlord is a great example of this, having you gliding along the water, sending objects flying back as you dodge incoming attacks and lasers, using ramps and rings to get closer and deal greater damage. Not only is it engaging and just complex enough, the actual feedback the game gives you, both audibly and visually as well as through the controller, allows there to feel weight to your strikes and creates an immersive sense of action that I adore. I think while I love the Mephiles fights mechanically, it might have been nicer to have this play directly into the story a little bit more. It has something to say, for sure, it works the same way it did in 06 to an extent, but I don't think it quite does enough here for me to love it. BioLizard and Metal Overlord are shallow bosses in a character sense, so their meaning being pretty surface level works just to get you to start thinking about the idea of Shadow's past insecurities or inadequacies. With Mephiles, it's the closest replica to Shadow there has been, and so I feel like that fight should have hit a little harder on a character level. It's not that it doesn't work, it's that it maybe doesn't do quite enough, especially at the crucial part in the story that he appears. I realized I haven't really talked about it mechanically. It's cool, it's fun, it's good fight. Everything else I said for the other bosses applies here. It's good. Devil Doom and Neo Devil Doom though? Oh, cinema. This fight is brilliant. All hail Shadow, the spectacle, the thoughtfulness of it all, the dynamism of the boss itself. This is what people think Sonic Frontiers bosses are like. Pile on top the thematic meaning behind this battle and you've got an all-time great for the Sonic history books. I also love that you don't go super here. I think it's infinitely more meaningful for Shadow to use his powers that he was given by Doom for the purpose of fulfilling his desires, to put Doom down and choose light. It's wonderful, and I guess, okay, let's talk about the story. When I booted up this game and jumped into the recap, I can't lie, I was stunned by the fact they weren't shying away from the lore established in Shadow the Hedgehog that has also never at any point been referenced since, other than probably in the comics I won't read, etc, etc. Black Doom, the last story, Maria, Shadow the Hedgehog music, it's all here. The game proudly says Shadow is canon, and given the last few weeks of work, I appreciate that, as I've come to really admire that game, as fucking weird as it is. Showing us the day that Shadow was born and fading to the modern day as Shadow looks on at Space Colony Ark, on the place he was made, on the last time he saw Maria. Shadow is here because Gunn detected an unusual biosignature aboard the Ark, but as we cut to a call with Rouge, we notice this is taking place at exactly the same time as Sonic Generations and Sonic's birthday party. It becomes clear here why Shadow is staying aboard the Ark. As Sonic celebrates his past, Shadow lingers in the trauma of his own. Despite the fact Shadow the Hedgehog is a story about dealing with that trauma and pushing past it, it's completely human that it would rear its head again, especially on anniversaries. Shadow is stuck. He can't view the past in any light but negatively, so he's running, isolating himself, because that's who he is. It's his nature. Now, before we go any further, I need to acknowledge the voice acting. It's obviously bad. Ever since 2010, when they replaced the 4 kids actors that took over the games in 2005, other than Mike Pollock as Eggman, they've always been worse. I think anyone denying that fact is kidding themselves and coping extremely hard. It's okay, you're allowed to like them despite the voice acting being worse. You're allowed to, that's okay. But to argue the voice acting isn't worse, or is somehow better, is...
What do you figure that was all about? The hair, and those arms, and look at the Chaos Emeralds!
Cause Eggman plus secretly built amusement park equals evil plot for us to foil.
I think you should get your brain checked. I have nothing against any of these actors personally, but they do not suit these characters and do not do them justice. All of them sound like Simpsons cameo parodies. It's never going to make sense to me how they literally swapped all of these tremendous actors that nailed the characters with a bunch of guys who aren't fit for the roles as much as they're clearly trying their best. It's also doubly wild to me that they kept on Mike Pollock, which makes sense, he's tremendous, but swapped out Jason Griffith? Your lead? What the fuck? Why did you do that? And I think this issue is a big one that greatly harms the story. I find it tough to take Shadow seriously when he sounds like he's some guy doing an impression on a 2006 YouTube poop.
Even I have a hard time distinguishing between the two of them.
Honestly, the Snapcube fandub voices sound better than these. But with that addressed, we can actually move on to the substance of the narrative. The reason for the events taking place isn't exactly important. It ends up being the same sort of thing as Sonic Generations. Big time dude fucking with time and causing Shadow to relive his past. And amongst this, Black Doom gets involved and tries fucking with Shadow to test him again, an attempt to bring him to his side or to steal his body for himself because, of course, one hedgehog is more useful than an entire army of aliens, apparently. Actually, he kind of is, isn't he? The story, as it stands, is basically just Shadow the Hedgehog, but again. Which tracks because Frontiers had the characters undergo arcs that were pretty much just Sonic Adventure 1, but again. Which doesn't make it okay to do, or any better that it's a retread, but also, most people don't like Shadow the Hedgehog. So if you were going to retread something, maybe it's that. However, where Frontiers was just stories we've seen play out before, Shadow flips the context to give greater meaning to being the same story as Shadow the Hedgehog. And this is how it uses its stages. In the original Shadow, the concept is that every stage has a different outcome, which allows for 326 different routes through the game. Go watch my video on that, it's a really fun one. And this means we're seeing so many potentials for what Shadow could be, the person he could become. They all matter and don't matter at the same time. It's saying you are not defined by any one path. Generations takes this and applies it to its stages from Shadow's history. It doesn't treat them as one continuous canon like Sonic Generations does. Instead, it treats them as fragmented parts of Shadow that don't actually interact in a linear sense. They are totally separate aspects of who he is and has been, which greater reflect both the context the games were made within and the arc they want to explore with Shadow here. The original 2005 game has choice be the thing that represents Shadow's potential. In Generations, it uses the fragmented parts of his history as the potentials for who Shadow could be, and the fact they aren't necessarily canon to each other makes them work. We know this is the case, by the way, because in the movie level, Shadow says this.
Beautiful city. That looks like how Maria described the Earth.
Which would make things confusing, Well, it kind of still does, but in the abstract sense that none of these games are directly connected for the purpose of this narrative, it leaves no real questions there. The games are jumbled and messy, and so that's just how it is. This game's narrative uses that to its advantage. It also allows this game to work as a way to unify all versions of Shadow into one singular whole in a metatextual sense, as well as a literal one. The character has been all over the place for so long, I'd argue since Sonic Adventure 2, and so here we finally get a larger picture of Shadow. He is all of these things, and none of them, and whoever he chooses to be. It may retread the themes of Shadow the Hedgehog, but by applying those themes to the greater context of Sonic as a brand as it stands in 2024, it allows itself greater depth. It's acknowledging how messy Shadow has been as a character and aligning all the pieces to create a character worth doing something with. More importantly though, they also give us lore on why Gerald made the first ultimate life form a giant lizard. It was a mistake. He was trying to cure Maria and he just did this by accident. Black Doom had to bail him out and create Shadow because he was just that fucking useless. Over the course of the game, Shadow confronts bosses that represent his own sense of self being tested. BioLizard, the prototype for the ultimate life form, Metal Overlord, a boss that is trying to surpass Sonic to become a better hedgehog through augmented means, mirroring Shadow in Sonic Adventure 2, and then you have Mephiles, obviously a direct mirror to Shadow and a major antagonist in Sonic 06, being the mind of Solaris in a body created in Shadow's image. This is a major part of Shadow's story in 06, coming face to face with a being that wants to destroy the world that looks just like him, having to fight back against the very thing he was created to be originally, once again proving his own autonomy wins out. Shadow Generations is the culmination of a fight he keeps having, the same internal battle he keeps winning at, but keeps dragging him back to where he started, to Black Doom, but more importantly, to Maria. Maria was Shadow's childhood friend, and she instilled in him the values that keep him good. I think the one place this story wavers from Shadow the Hedgehog is in my own interpretation of that ending. I felt the ending was Shadow saying goodbye to a version of himself he didn't understand anymore, a version of himself that he couldn't remember, and moving forward with who he is now. That's why he says goodbye Shadow the Hedgehog and casts away the photo. He's not that guy anymore. He can't be, and so he moves on. This Shadow, though, remembers Maria, apparently. It's a core part of his isolation and pain, and maybe that has more to say in a meta sense. Maybe the fact that Sonic Team keep having Shadow going through the same arc is keeping him shackled to the past, which is the point of the story here. Maria being ground zero for that, which makes sense why Maria is here. This isn't a retread, it's a recontextualization of a grander narrative that's been going on for 24 years. Maria symbolizes not what she did in Sonic Adventure 2 or Shadow the Hedgehog. Here she symbolizes the tether that has kept Shadow going around in circles for all of that time. Toward the end of the story, as Shadow grows in Doom powers, taking on more of his alien form, close to losing himself, Maria snaps him out of it, telling him that this isn't who he is, and what follows is this beautiful dialogue.
Do you know why I named you Shadow? Because without light, there's only darkness. But a shadow will show you where to find the light. Do you understand? I don't want you to be driven by darkness. I want you to be happy. Stand in the light with peace in your heart.
This scene isn't only talking to Shadow, this scene is talking about Shadow to the audience. It's getting to the root of who this character is and was always meant to be. Since 2001, Shadow has been this symbol of edge and angst and darkness because that's what was cool about him, but it was never the point. Sonic Adventure 2 ends with Shadow remembering his promise to Maria, and here Maria reins him back in, reminding us and the developers what Shadow was supposed to represent, a call to the light. In Shadow the Hedgehog, Shadow resets to who he was before Sonic Adventure 2's development, and ends the game breaking free of his past, only to then continue being the same angsty character because that's what the people love. Maria saying this isn't who you are is a direct deconstruction of what Shadow became, and now we can begin to unravel that. Doom, of course, works as the opposite to Maria. He works as an in-universe call to the dark, but in a meta sense, Doom represents the idea that Shadow is destined to remain this edgy, brooding boy, and that he will always be weighed down by trauma and pain and darkness. That's just his lot in life. That's who he is as a character. The conflict at the game's climax might be the same as Shadow the Hedgehog, but the context changes it entirely. This is no longer Shadow rejecting his past and his so-called destiny in the sense of Sonic lore. This is Shadow finally breaking free of the confines he was placed within as a character. Before fighting Doom, he speaks to Maria again. Seeing what he's become and seeing his big bat wings, Maria calls out, and Shadow stops her. And what he says next solidifies the very thing that I've been talking about.
It's all right, Maria. I'm letting go of that destructive anger. But I will continue to fight. Fight with your wish in my heart. Your wish for everyone to have a chance to be happy.
This line, giving people a chance to be happy, is Shadow speaking back Maria's words from Sonic Adventure 2, calling back once again to Shadow's original purpose as a character. It's so fucking poetic, and with a smile to Maria, that takes us into the final boss with Doom. The heroic reprise of All Hail Shadow as he finally banishes the symbol and representation of the life he was confined to for so long. This moment is deeply cathartic in the context of the story and as a fan of Shadow as a character. He finally reclaims who he is and what he stands for. If Shadow post Sonic Adventure 2 was ever to continue, he needed to move forward rather than regressing every single time out of a fear that fans wouldn't like him if he wasn't a dark, edgy boy. And now he finally has a chance to. This is him breaking free of that mold. The final scene brings all of this together in such a stunning conclusion. Shadow gives the Chaos Emerald to Rouge so that she can go and fix the plot of Sonic Generations, and Shadow heads back to Maria. As they fade and time returns to normal, Shadow desperately says he'll stop Rouge, he'll use Chaos Control, he'll let Maria stay, to which she says this.
Shadow, no. I don't want to be frozen in one place in time. Besides, your friends need your help.
But you don't know what's going to happen.
I know I'll see you again. And if fate draws us apart, I will always be in your heart.
This is so beautiful, man. Maria's words echo through Shadow's history. She doesn't want to stay frozen in one place forever, the same way Shadow needs to move on, both in the context of the story and as a character. Stagnation is as good as death, and Shadow will stagnate no longer. Maria is the catalyst for that. This game is the catalyst for that, for allowing Shadow to finally colour outside the lines for the first time. And so he runs, to his friends, to a life of endless possibilities. Because he's not only one thing. He never was. He's so many. And he's finally whole again. This final tear is not a tear of sadness, it's a tear of hope, which, to me, is what Shadow stands for most of all. Thanks for watching. Thank you everyone for watching this video. This is the first outro where I'm not on camera, on screen, because I've been working back to back to back, and I looked like a fucking mess. This game really resonated with me. It hit all of the right places that it needed to. I think it took its time to acknowledge, like, what Shadow stands for and what they need to do with his character moving forward, and the fact that they'd fucked it up so many times. But in doing so, they also acknowledge parts of Shadow that had never really been touched on before, and decided sort of that every part of Shadow is valuable to an extent, and he can be so much more than that basic silhouette that was carved out in the early 2000s. That gives me so much hope for the character. I can't wait to see what they do with him next and where they take him. I think there's so much room for him to grow and change and develop. That said, will they? I mean, who really knows? This game says one thing, but there are so many people working on the Sonic games that Shadow could just fall back into stagnation and just be that same brooding character that he always was. But I hope they don't do that. I hope that this is a new start for the character and they can take him somewhere different, maybe. I don't know, only time will tell, I suppose. This game though, just in general, as a whole game, as a Sonic game, gives me so much hope for the future of this franchise, which is a crazy fucking thing to say about Sonic, because it's been, what, bad for ever. But if the next mainline Sonic game is made in a way like this, with a similar design philosophy and a similar focus on narrative, and god, it could be really fucking good, man. Honestly, like, I've been thinking about it, and I feel like they should go back to, I don't want to say the adventure style games, because I think we've evolved to at a point where you can't just make an adventure game, but I think if you melded the adventure formula and like what they were trying to do with 06 with the Frontiers and Shadow Generation sort of open zone type thing, you could have a sick type of game on your hands. Like, imagine an area like Station Square or like Soliana or whatever. Is that what it's called? An area like that, but that's structured something like a Frontiers open zone sort of thing, with you know, the ability to explore and look around, and like it's a sort of like a large area with like a little town and then a large countryside, and you can run really fast and gain momentum and just explore. But then also the story is told through linear missions that you would then enter, like, you know, like you do in well, every Sonic game ever. I think you would have the true spiritual successor to that adventure formula, you know what I mean? And the adventure formula is such a weird thing to say, because Sonic Adventure 2, the most popular one, doesn't even have that hub-based formula. That was just SA1 and then 06. But I think bringing that back would be pretty awesome, to be honest. Frontiers is really generally not what I want out of Sonic game. It just didn't do it for me. But if you did something like what 06 was trying to do, and you do it with what Shadow Generations managed to do, oh man, you could have a really cool game with some, you know, unique characters you just sort of bring in, and you know, you take Sonic on like a new arc. You don't just retread old things. Maybe invent a new character, you know, just push out the, you know, try and just think outside the box a little bit. I think that's what we really need, is get that design down like you've seen in Shadow Generations, apply it to a really cool context, and then think outside the box and give us a cool story. We could be onto something, I don't know, but I think at this point I'm going to be a Sonic fan for life no matter what happens, so we'll see. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts on Shadow Generations down in the comments. Thank you to everyone on Patreon, by the way, as well. I really appreciate you. You're all fantastic. I have to, like, I have so many at this point, like, humble brag, I have a lot of patrons, that I have to drag out this bit where I thank patrons, because I find that, I don't get enough time for the names to all pass before I go on to the next bit that I'm talking about, but I thank you all, I really appreciate it. And if you want to join people on Patreon, I do have an exclusive commentary on the Sonic 3 movie, where I go into detail and talk about my thoughts on that, so feel free to jump on Patreon. It's rocking over there. I don't know what that means. Anyway, thank you, as always, to my producers and master assassins. You're getting 2 thank yous in 1 month. That's pretty fucking crazy, but I guess you've earned it at this point, really, haven't you? Thanks so much to Cabbage, Dildog, Adam Barnes, Arenathon, Callum Theftmas Kelly, Damien the Not So Orange Gnome, Flash Paradox, Geek Fam, Jake Ryan, Luke Pierce, Rolands, and Zeta. Thank you, everybody. I love you, and I want to give you a big kiss. Consensually, of course. I would never do anything that would make you uncomfortable. Thank you. Obviously, the year is coming to an end. I've got my end of the year video coming out eventually, and AC2 next year, and then I'm reset and I'm back to the drawing board. So hopefully 2025 can be a sick year, but I'll let you go. Have a good Christmas. I don't know when this video is coming out. This might come out after Christmas. Shit, I don't know. Shit. Okay, thank you, everybody. Love ya. See you next time. Bye-bye.